All right, welcome back to state and local government. We did the legislature last week. You guys are taking your tests right now as I'm recording this, and so far they're looking pretty good. Just the main thing I notice, and I'm noticing, is just, and I'm getting a lot of emails about this, is just there are reserved. I'm asking specifically for reserved powers. I'm asking specifically for delegated powers, powers for the federal government, and I'm asking specifically for concurrent powers. Now you guys are throwing concurrent powers in with your answers to delegated and reserved, and that's wrong. I mean, technically, yeah, you're right, but I'm asking only for reserved powers. I'm asking only for delegated powers. So that's that. So we just have a little bit more to do with legislatures. We're not going to spend too long on this. I'm happy with what I was using last week. I've just discovered there's a little more information I'd like to include, so I'll fix that up and have it better for next semester. So here we go. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is gerrymandering. This is a cartoon, as you can see, of Massachusetts, the electoral districts in Massachusetts, that was drawn by the legislature to just heavily favor the party of the incumbent governor, Elbridge Gerry. And and this is where the term comes from, gerrymander. This is where the term comes from. Yeah, it kind of looks like a dragon here. And none of these districts are what we demand in Illinois. None of these things, I think, can be taken to be contiguous, compact, or probably, and this is just speculation on my part, equal in population. So take that for what it's worth. And that's what it is, gerrymander, reflecting the process of drawing districts to favor one political party over another. And that happens all the time in Illinois. We just drew the maps. The Democrats, again, got to have a heavy hand in drawing the maps. The map was drawn heavily in favor of the Democrats. So Congress, and this is old, conducts a census to determine the population of each state and to apportion districts more evenly. When they are purposely drawn to represent a certain constituency, they're called minority districts. And this term should be in your book, because they include a majority of the minority population given how the district has been drawn. Where this happens in Illinois too. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The Supreme Court has ruled that race cannot be the predominant factor in redistricting. So here's the meat of what I wanted to get at. In Illinois, if the General Assembly fails to pass a redistricting plan by June 30th following the federal census, which we usually do, a commission is established to draw the legislative map. There are 8 members in this commission, 4 citizens, 4 legislators. No more than 4 can belong to the same party. And it's just a simple majority vote is required. And the map is considered done, redistricted. This doesn't often work. It's because of the even number. If there were 9, yeah, we'd probably get a majority vote, but the process doesn't stop here. If a legislative map is not agreed upon, that should read, when a legislative map is not agreed upon by the 8-member commission, 2 names from 2 different political parties will be submitted to the Illinois Supreme Court. Now, what the Illinois Supreme Court does is present the Illinois Secretary of State with the two names. And again, in the last couple of decades, this hasn't been a situation of if this happens, it's been a situation of when this happens. Because we live, again, in an age of hyperpartisanship, and nobody's agreeing on anything, and Democrats and Republicans can't work together, and you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So the Secretary of State, Jesse White, now as of October 1st, 2022, must select the 9th member, and this 9th member is the commission tiebreaker from the two names no later than October 9th. 1980 was the first time this tie-breaking system was used, and what you're looking at is Abe Lincoln's stovepipe hat. Not the real thing, I'm sure, but that's what it was modeled after. So Jim Edgar, who was a governor of Illinois, who didn't go to jail, drew the name of the Democrat out of Abe Lincoln's stovepipe hat, the ancient stovepipe hat, which meant that the Legislative Redistricting Process Commission would now produce a map that would favor the Democrats. So Edgar, a Republican, reached his hand into this ancient hat, pulled out the name of a Democrat, and there it was. And even though he was Secretary of State, he couldn't just say, "Oh, I don't like the result of that. Let's do it again." Probably one of the reasons why he's not in jail. So the 9-member commission, they complete the redistricting map with a majority vote, or the matter is handled by the Illinois Supreme Court. And just depending upon how cantankerous and the political process is in the state, and how far we're willing to go, and who's in charge, and the personalities that are running things, I mean, this redistricting process can go on and on and on and on. So if you can't get a majority vote with 9 members, the matter is handled by the Illinois Supreme Court. The Democrats, again this time too, created the new state map. It was litigated again, and the courts required some modification before it was fully implemented. So in 91, 10 years after, the Democrats controlled, surprise, surprise, the Illinois General Assembly, and they passed a redistricting map that now Governor, moved up from Secretary of State Jim Edgar, had vetoed. So they threw it back to the Legislative Redistricting Commission once again, and the 8-member group couldn't come to a decision once again. See why I'm saying this isn't a matter of if, but when. Nobody can agree. And this is why the political process is somewhat broken. I don't think it can ever be fixed, but it is certainly somewhat too very broken, depending on what you're looking at. So the 8-member group had a stalemate. The 9th member was selected by the then Secretary of State George Ryan, who was later one of our governors who went to prison. At the time, Ryan chose the name of a Republican, and the commission settled on a Republican-favored map. And they did away with the stovepipe hat this time, and Ryan selected one of the names just from that crystal bowl there. So it doesn't have to be Abe Lincoln's stovepipe hat they're pulling this name out of. It could be an ashtray. You could put 2 names on the governor's, on the Secretary of State's desk, and say, pick one, Mr. Secretary. It could be any number of things. So the Democrats, of course, contested the map that the Republicans settled on, and the Supreme Court got involved, and they sent the map back to the Legislative Redistricting Commission for revisions. The Democrats appealed the revised map because, of course they did. The Republicans would do the same thing. I'm not trying to imply that that's just a Democrat thing. The court ultimately upheld the revisions which favored the Republican Party across the state. And in 2001, we did it again. A Democrat was selected because the commission failed to produce a map as expected. The 2001 map favored the Democratic Party because that was the tie-breaking vote. And despite calls for reform, and it should be reformed because the system is, well, I can't say it's not working because it does work. It does produce a result. But we continue to use this democracy by lottery feature. Pull a name out of a hat, send the thing back to the court. The court sends it back. It's just really quite a lot. I mean, how the map turns out and how the map looks and all that, that's a big deal for party politics over the course of a decade. That's a huge deal, but this it could be reformed. The stakes, as they say on here, are high. Redistricting is partisan, highly partisan. Redistricting has resulted in a legislative redistricting commission being called 3 times since 1980. Redistricting in Illinois has resulted in numerous court challenges and calls for reforming the process. So we're expecting the political parties to agree to work together, to want the common good for all the people in the state. Well, that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So the next section we're going to move on to, we're going to skip right to the end and talk about reform proposals. So just ignore all the other slides again that we haven't been through. These are the only 2 things that I needed to add to what I had said. So what types of reforms have been proposed and adopted in the states? So 15 states have term limits. That's one. That would probably be a great one. But we are expecting then the legislator, individual, the body, I mean, however you want to look at it, to agree to limit their power. In Illinois right now, they can stay for as long as they'd like. For people, as long as they can convince people to keep voting them back in. But that's one proposal. 15 states have term limits. We are not one. 4 states tried to adopt term limits. The state Supreme Courts in those states overturned the measure. And 2 states repealed their term limits. So another is campaign finance reform. And there are 3 methods of regulating campaign finance. Disclosure reports. So candidates will file contribution and expenditure reports, how much people are giving to them, how much they're spending. Contribution limits also. So candidates are limited in how much they may receive from individuals and or contributions. So I can only give, say, candidate A $3,000 because the legislature says so. Public financing. So some portion of the campaign is funded through public monies instead of private contributions. So the state is providing for this, and you can only have X amount of money to spend. So disclosure reports, every state has some type of disclosure requirement. They do vary in the frequency of reporting. They vary in the specific information required, so there's no uniform set of disclosure reporting. So contribution limits, 5 states don't have any. About half of the states limit corporate contributions. About half of the states ban them outright. Public financing, so some portion of the campaign is funded through public monies. Half of the states have some type of public financing, but most of the grants they give to candidates running for office are very small, and they're not applicable across the board. So everybody, what office you're running for, it's not uniform. So the monies are funded through the income tax checkoff or legislative appropriation. So, again, we haven't found a great way to make this work either. We could also have shorter sessions. So there's less, they're getting paid less. There's less time for them to disagree. I mean, however you want to look at it. 38 states have adopted shorter legislative sessions as one way to hold legislators accountable. So no overtime or per diem pay for sitting around and not doing a thing. And to discourage a full-time legislature. We have not done this. Our legislature was meant in the Constitution of the state to be a part-time gig. It is not. It's a full-time proposal. We've looked, at how long they're actually in the chamber. It's 30 to 40, 45 days per session. So every 2 years. So that's not a lot of work, but we're paying them $69,000 and some change. So in the second instance, part-time or hybrid legislators do not depend upon their legislative office for their entire salary. In other words, they keep their day jobs. And this happens in Illinois, too. There are full-time legislators, and full-time I should put in quotes because they're not really, but then they go and are full-time lawyers also, or full-time teachers, or full-time corporate officers. So, they're very rich. Do they depend on their legislative office for their entire salary? No. The 69,000 something is probably, and I say probably because I'm probably not thinking of one or two legislators, and I hate to just lump a whole group of people together. They're probably thinking of that money as just very nice pocket change. Ethics training. I'd like to see our legislature do that. For legislators and their staff, more disclosure of lobbying activities, more rules pertaining to fundraising during the legislative session, revolving door rules that prohibit legislators from taking lobbying positions once they leave the legislature. So that's a good way to make some money if you're a state senator for 4 or 6 or, well, not 6, 4 or 8 or 12 or 16 years after you leave office, you go and join a lobbying firm and you lobby for the interests of, say, gun manufacturers in the state of Illinois. And you get sent to the State House quite often because you know who is in the State House, you have relationships with the people in the State House, and you can capitalize on that to make money for your new boss, whoever that might be. So we've already looked at the executive branch, but that is all she wrote on the legislature. Sorry if that was bleak, but we have a lot of problems, and they don't seem to be getting solved too terribly quickly here. So that's it for this. We're going to start on the judiciary. So I'll see you in a minute.